Hello.
Hello. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
That's good. Everything
You hear us
working?
good?
Yeah, everything working on your side?
Yeah, just trying to polish off the presentation a bit.
Okay.
So, is there anything we should know beforehand?
Nothing much. I'm just going to start by introducing you, and I think we'll probably start on the dot at about 4 o'clock. And then our flow is always just vision, and then current reality, and then last we just do action steps from you. But I'm going to give you kind of the floor, and I may ask a few questions, and then in the end we'll open up for some questions from the audience, whoever's joining us.
Do you know who will be joining us?
I haven't checked in today yet, but we'll probably see people starting to join us at about 4 o'clock.
Okay, good. What background do you think people have? Who's the audience?
I'm not sure. Normally it's people from all over. So yeah, people from South Africa that have joined, or people from all over. Last time we had people from the Netherlands, from Europe, from all over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
We'll see. And normally, you know, people who register, normally a lot of people register, but they can't make it live. So they then rewatch it on YouTube or on Facebook. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, good.
And the time slot we've got?
4 o'clock to about 5:30. That's okay with you? So 1.5 hours to 2 hours, depending on how many questions there are afterwards.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that enough time?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've got quite a few slides, but a lot of pictures.
Nice. That's always awesome. Hi, 𝗘𝗰ihe.
Hey.
How are you?
Good. In a work mode, but okay.
𝗘𝗰ihe, this is William and Gerard, our guest speakers today. This is 𝗘𝗰ihe. She's the whiz behind the scenes of Ecocivilisation. She helps us out with everything.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How are you?
So I just have one question, since I wasn't present the last time. Do you need anything from me regarding, I know, reading out the questions or anything like that, just to know?
That would be great, 𝗘𝗰ihe, because last time I was like a little bit overwhelmed with the questions that were coming in. And
Okay.
really, you know, it's so fast that like when you read the questions to try, you know, and manage. So that would be great if you could, if there's questions coming in, if you could manage it.
Okay.
Do you know how many signups with registrations we've had?
19.
19.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and will we be streaming live, or
Yes.
okay, we're going to be streaming live on Facebook, and
Yes.
we're also going to be, it'll be available on YouTube afterwards, so we can promote it afterwards as well.
Yeah, because we are recording, so it will be available afterwards as well. Do you also want me to say, I mean, a bit of house rules, like that this event is being recorded, that we'll be streaming live? Yeah.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome. Do you know Violetta is going to join us for this one?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Yes. I sent an email a little bit earlier, but I don't know if you got it. Yeah, so I wanted to know if she could just briefly, maybe again, just introduce Ecocivilisation to us as a start.
So I'm just sharing my screen to see that you can
See everything. Yes.
see this all right.
Awesome.
So you can see the front slide there, the first slide.
Yes, we can see
Was it
it
cut
clearly.
off? Is the text cut off?
No, there's just a little square on it saying give subtitles a try.
Okay, so you can see the last sentence. Would like to develop Sandberg as an eco-community through share block process?
It's a little bit cut off.
It's cut off. Yeah, I noticed that. That's happened sometimes. I'm not quite sure why that cuts off. But sometimes I've got a dual monitor, so something weird happens there sometimes with the dual monitor. I'm just going to try again. Same story, I think.
Gosh, is it maybe a monitor setting? I'm not sure. For the size of, you know, if you're using.
Application restart. Let's try again. Same story. Solution or
Sorry, I wish I could help. I know very little about Microsoft. But it's okay. I mean, I think you could just, if you can just read it, it also helps us to pay attention and to not just read the screen, but to pay attention to your voice.
okay, let's just try it, see if it does it like this. But now I guess you can see the whole of PowerPoint and not just the slides, right?
Just that one slide. The rest, I think, is good.
Yeah, it looks like it's just the one slide.
It's too big. That one slide. Too low.
Okay, but
All the things I do.
what do you know?
I check it.
Okay, that's odd. Maybe it is true. These look all right.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so maybe it's just something a bit up with this.
That's
Okay, good.
Okay, good. Great. Looks like we've got some people that are joining us already. For the moment, could I ask you to just stop sharing your presentation for now, and then when I introduce you, great, that just makes it a bit easier for me. Right. Okay. So Lieselberger already says, hello, everyone. Looking forward to the presentation. Violetta says, hello, everyone. Okay. So we're just on 4 o'clock. 𝗘𝗆𝗵𝗃 is here as well. Lovely to be here. Welcome, 𝗘𝗵𝗃.
Hello, Eleftheria.
Hello, Violetta. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited. Looking forward to this discussion.
Yes.
Very much so.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sonia Klopchik's here. Thank you. Welcome, Sonia. So we have South Africa and Slovenia connected. Okay. So I think as we wait for people to start joining us, let's just start today. So I just want to say welcome to everybody. And again, we'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, to our guest speakers and everybody that's joining us. Time is such a precious commodity. And so I really just want to say thank you very much for joining us. And welcome to our second Ecocivilisation talk for our wing for South Africa. This will be part 1 of Ecocivilisation in the Plant Kingdom. And our topic for today is going to be conservation of the fynbos ecology. And I'm hoping that everybody in South Africa, but also in Europe, will learn what the word fynbos means and how beautiful the landscape and ecology of fynbos really is. And so I'd like to say welcome to everybody again. And in our discussion today, we'll be talking about the opportunities and the challenges threatening the conservation of the unique fynbos ecology at Sandberg Fanboss Reserve through an illustration of various projects and initiatives that our 2 guest speakers today have facilitated. And I'm going to hand over now to 𝗃𝗃 to just take us through some of our house rules.
Yes, hello everyone from my part as well. Just before we dive into our talk, so this webinar or our session is being recorded, and also right when I'm done, we'll start the live stream on Facebook. So the video will be available later on there and also on our website, ecocivilisation.com. So you can rewatch it, share it with anyone you think would be interested. If you have any questions or any problems during the session, please write to me and we'll try to solve them. Also, if during this session you have any questions about the topics we'll speak about, please write them in the chat and we will read them out loud and answer them when the time is right. Yeah, I think that's it from my part. Like I said, if you have anything that you would like to ask or share, please do it in the chat. And I'm also here for you if you need any technical support from our part. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, 𝗃𝗃. Okay, just a quick introduction from my side. My name is 𝗘𝗆𝗃, and my passion is really regenerative living in harmony with nature. And I've been honored to be elected as the country chair wing for the Ecocivilisation movement in South Africa. I truly believe that we're at this precipice of global alchemy, and that now is the time for us to courageously awaken to the truth of who we really are. And that when we reconnect with our divine nature in nature, that connection really helps us to awaken to a state of grace where we can just return to heart-centered living in harmony with nature. I would like to also introduce you to our curator for Ecocivilisation and our 2 guest speakers today before we explore our topic, Ecocivilisation and the Plant Kingdom, conservation of fynbos ecology. So our curator for Ecocivilisation is 𝗣𝗆𝗃𝗁. She's an innovator in mind, a socialist at heart, environmentalist in spirit, a liberal in actions. She is curious, committed, open, engaging, dedicated to love, truth, collaboration, joy, compassion, building trust to serve her higher self and the higher good, and a traveler through space and time. She's the former EU Commissioner of Transport, the former Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Slovenia, the founder and general manager of 𝗣𝗿_𝘁, and the G100 Global Chair Member of Ecocivilisation Wing. Welcome, 𝗣𝗍𝗁.
Thank you very much, 𝗘𝗍₂. I don't have the visual permission, so I will be really quick. So here we are at another crossroad, diving into something that I feel will have a long-lasting consequences for our understanding also of the model that has emerged, and I shared with the community about a year and a half ago, where beings are really important element in the overall understanding what this life, planet, and everything that coexists on this planet is all about. Last time, with your guidance, 𝗘𝗍₂, we were able to dive into the communication with animals and relationship with the animal world. Today, we're adding the plants. And more and more, we are becoming aware that this is something that is missing really in the overall understanding what society can and is all about. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. I'm grateful to you and your guests that you're willing to enrich the wisdom and knowledge of eco-civilization community. And I do hope that we will continue to co-create this exciting, possible new world, new vision, shared vision that we are all who are sort of entering in this intertwining relationship, co-creating together. We're tapping into emergence. We don't dare to speculate about the future, but we are observing the emergence, and we act with a very active presence and contribution to this emergence. And let's hope we'll be able to find a way for us to gain the right to live on this beautiful planet Earth for many, many more years to come. So 𝗘𝗍₂, thanks again, and welcome everyone who's listening to us either on a Facebook channel or is present at this session directly, and back to you. 𝗘𝗍₂, back to you.
You are muted, so we can hear you.
Thank you, 𝗫𝗻. I would like to now introduce our two guest speakers. And if I may introduce them as the custodians of a beautiful reserve called Sandberg Fanboss Reserve, which is 50 kilometers from the coast of the 𝗘𝗰𝗃𝗃, the most southerly tip of Africa, and about 5 kilometers from the historic town of 𝗘𝗰. So I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker, which is William Stafford, who is a life scientist and researcher in the Sustainability and Economic Research Group at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. His interests include fynbos conservation, permaculture, regenerative, renewable energy, environmental education, and sustainable development. Welcome, William.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Pleased to meet you all.
And I'd also like to introduce our second guest speaker, who is 𝗘𝗰𝗃𝗃, who's the manager and trust holder of Sandberg Fanboss Reserve. He's an experienced landscape ecologist and botanist. His interests include fynbos conservation, landscape design, natural building, and environmental education. Welcome, 𝗘𝗃.
Well, thank you very much for this invite, and Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and hi to everybody. And I'm looking forward to share Sandberg with you and what we do at the reserve. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We've listened to our vision, and now the second part of this is really looking at current reality. I think the current reality we're facing, specifically when it comes to really stepping into relation to our plant kingdom, is the changes which climate change is going to bring. And in my conversation with both William and Gerard, we had a talk around fire, which I'm sure they're going to be talking about today, in terms of managing it. And also really what I've learned and understood is that fire could also help to heal the land. And with some plant species, fire is something that's actually quite necessary. So I know that they're going to share some very interesting information for us in terms of that. And also in current reality, it's looking at what we really need to face, but also the wonderful projects that's already in place. And I know that both of you are going to share some amazing projects that you're busy with at the moment at Sandberg, and also an example for us to follow, in which we can really step into collaborating and co-creating an eco-civilization where ecology really is at the heart center of all of us. So I would love to hand over to both of you now. I know you've prepared a presentation for us, and we're really looking forward to learning everything from you today.
Thank you very much. So hi everyone, today we're going to be telling you about Sandberg Fanboss Reserve. It's a place, as mentioned, in the southern tip of Africa, near the town of Elim, the historic town of Elim. It harbors this unique vegetation type called fynbos or fine bush, and that's pretty much endemic and unique to this part of the world. Most of our work on the reserve has been focused around conservation of this unique ecology. A lot of this unique vegetation type is in fact highly threatened, and the reserve is basically under the 𝗳𝗪𝘁 Trust. It's a family trust. So the farm was actually bought some time ago with the initial intention of developing it into an agricultural type of development. But it was soon realized that the soil is relatively poor and it harbors this unique, exceptional biodiversity, which is under threat. And we really looked at alternative uses and options for this landscape. So it's currently being developed into a private nature reserve. And we also have the support in terms of developing it into a private nature reserve from the government, particularly the Cape Nature Stewardship Program. And in moving forward, I'd actually like to share this development with other participants, other keen people, and develop it in somewhat as an eco-community. So we're looking at a unique process to develop this, this land and to share it in terms of land parcels while conserving a large portion of the land for conservation. So through a sort of share block process.
Maybe this is where I need to firstly talk about where the property comes from and the agricultural connections to the property. My family bought the land in the 80s, in the 1980s, to expand a current wheat farming business that my family was or still is operating in the northern Overberg, in the grain belt of the Fanboss region. Very soon the family realized that, as William just mentioned, that the soil is very poor. It's not really suitable for the kind of agriculture that was envisioned. My family wanted to sell the property, and in the late 90s, myself and William decided to rather take this on and start developing it as a nature reserve, or start developing or try to understand what to do with at that stage, it was close to 1,000 hectares of natural land, but which had quite poor soil. We around 2005, we sold off the fields that was already where nature has already been destroyed, and we kept 700 hectares of which is under various, some of it pristine, some of it not pristine. Back to fynbos, or back to plants in general, what our talk is about now. William will tell you a little bit about the floral kingdom of this region and the world, of course.
So as I mentioned, this is a unique floral kingdom. There's 6 floral kingdoms in the world, and the Cape Floral Kingdom is one of them. And this is in fact the smallest, yet in fact one of the most diverse floral kingdoms. It contains over 9,500 plant species, with 70% of them being endemic. In other words, they're found nowhere else in the world. So you won't have seen these plants anywhere else. They're pretty unique. And the Cape Floral Kingdom is of course a hotspot because, like many natural areas, this biodiversity is severely under threat. So the main threats are in fact agriculture, which has transformed a lot of the lands, but largely the lowlands, the more fertile lowlands have been transformed. And then the other big threats are really invasive alien plants, exotic plants, which have been introduced into the landscape or into South Africa and the area. And these exotic plants are invasive. They take over in a rampant weedy fashion, and they smother and outcompete all the other vegetation. And then additionally, the lack of appropriate land management, particularly the management of fire, has also increased the threats to this unique fynbos biodiversity.
Just to bring the Cape Floral Kingdom into a bit of perspective, if you look at this global map, you see the main floral kingdoms of the world. And then at the bottom of Africa, you see this tiny spot, which is the Cape Floral Kingdom. So Willem mentioned just now, in this Cape Floral Kingdom, about 9,500 species. Just to put that into perspective of the plant species in South Africa, we've got roughly 27,000 indigenous plant species in the country, and in 6% of that area, of the areas, the surface area of South Africa, is the fynbos region, which is also the Cape and the Floral Kingdom, the Cape Floral Kingdom. And 9,500 or 1/3 of all species in the country, in 6% of that. So extremely high in biodiversity. There's very few places in the world where you would find this kind of biodiversity in such a small geographic area. Just to put it, just to show it a bit on a map, there's a map of Africa, and on the left you see the Fanboss Biome, which is basically a strip of vegetation on the southern and eastern coast of South Africa, and it between the coast and the Cape-Fold Mountains, quite a high mountain range, which prevents, or which with certain weather patterns make this strip unique. It's cold, wet winters, as opposed to the rest of Southern Africa, which is very hot and dry very cold and dry in winter, hot and wet in summer. We've got a typical Mediterranean climate, which you might find around Northern Africa and the Mediterranean area of Southern Europe. and bringing it down, right down to the tip, you'll see a red circle at the bottom with the village of 𝗘𝗰 in that red circle, and the reserve and the area where we are is within that circle. Within this circle, slightly bigger than this circle actually, is about 2,500 of that 9,500 species cramped into this region. So the hottest of the hotspot of this area.
So we're going to take you through some pictures of the reserve to give you a nice feeling and illustration of the biodiversity. And this is the first picture. It shows you some of the amazing plant biodiversity, including bulbous plants. But what makes Fynbos particularly characteristic is the three plant families, the Proteaceae, of the proteas, which people know quite well, belong to the Proteaceae, but also the restios, or the reeds, of which you can see in the front of the picture there, and the ericas, or the heaths, or heathers as you might know them. So those are the three characteristic families which harbor hundreds of different species, those plant families, but that really defines the Fynbos vegetation type.
At the reserve, there's two distinct different fynbos types. There's Overberg sandstone fynbos, which the photograph you just saw is typical Overberg sandstone fynbos. So it's all, it's higher up, it's slightly higher altitude. The 𝗘𝗰finde fynbos is all the lowlands, and the 𝗘𝗰finde fynbos is the areas that, because of richer soils, because of sediment of thousands of years flowing downstream or downhill, these richer soils, the vegetation in these richer areas has been plowed up for agriculture. In many of these areas, there's of 𝗘𝗰finde fynbos, they think about 4% left. Very similar to the Renosterveld vegetation, which is the drier vegetation type of fynbos. It's very similar to fynbos, also on the seaside of the 𝗘𝗰finde Mountains, but slightly drier, slightly more inland. The ferrocrete fynbos, very little of it left. I've shared a link, an iNaturalist link here, and in this iNaturalist link, if you click on that link, maybe not now, but at some stage you can access some of the diversity of the plants of the reserve and the region.
So the iNaturalist site is, of course, also a citizen science site. It's encouraging people who can enjoy and wander around in nature to help record and spot the biodiversity present. Because, of course, what we don't know about and what we don't realize, we cannot manage appropriately. So it's trying to encourage that citizen science aspect, and we're helping to contribute to that platform. Yeah,
this is a typical landscape of very old fynbos veld, about 20-year-old, just about ready to burn, or definitely ready to burn. But this photograph was just shared so you have a good view of how the region looks. In the lowlands, in the far distance, you see a lot of fields plowed up and destroyed.
And you can also, I think, see the sandy nature of the soil. It's called Sandberg for a reason, and of course, the poor soil quality makes it unsuitable for agriculture, fortunately, which makes it very suitable for fynbos, this unique vegetation type. And Karat mentioned that this is very old veld, so these shrublands only get to about 1 meter, 1.5 meters, maybe a little bit more, before they really mature and start senescing. So from between 12 and 20 years, that population is really becoming aged and senescing, and fire is a natural part of cycling fynbos vegetation and really needs to happen. So in fact, if you protect your fynbos from fire and try to prevent fire, you'll actually start to lose biodiversity because your populations and your species will start aging and dying off, and you'll be losing your seed banks.
In this photograph, in the far background, you can see the whole, what used to be 𝗘𝗰finde fynbos
in the lowlands.
In the lowlands there at the bottom, and that is all gone. It's all plowed up and transformed into blocks of monoculture. We all need food, but we all also need water, and we also need all the other services of what biodiversity provides for us. In the foreground is, of course, a very beautiful 𝗘𝗰liche𝗁𝗶𝘃𝗁𝗁, a typical fynbos plant.
People call them pin cushions, and you can actually see why.
This is a typical fynbos felt that was burned about 5 years previously. The Asteraceae, the white flowers you see in the foreground, we call it everlastings because it's a paper-like flower. Is a pioneer species. So in succession, after this specific species, will a range of longer living species will follow, including taller, longer living, call it the big forest or the old forest growth of this specific system. But if you imagine this system can only be 20 years old. So old forest years, 1.5 to 2 meters tall. This is very young in the cycle of this of fynbos life.
So this gives you another idea of the veldt. Obviously, same piece of land, but slightly different aspects. So over the hill into the next valley, and you can see how the vegetation changes, both because of the aspect, maybe also because of the soil type, and of course the fire regimes which take place. So in terms of managing the land, obviously I mentioned fire is a natural cycle and is needed, in fact, for fynbos. But one wants to have some kind of mosaic of fires taking place on one's land, so one can have a mosaic of different ages and maintain this diversity, this unique diversity.
There is a reason for trying to maintain that blocks of different veldt ages. Long ago, it was an uninterrupted landscape of fynbos over the whole fynbos biome, but through human interaction and human intervention in the landscape, it was all parceled off. It was all cut up with roads and with fields and so on. So fire cycles cannot happen naturally anymore to maintain. So we need to adapt the way we deal with a landscape on a much smaller scale that was as it happened through a natural evolution of this specific plant kingdom. This is also just typical fynbos veldt. On the left side, you can see close up in a bucket a variety of fynbos species that I picked one morning early. On the right hand side, the same everlasting fynbos flowers that you so the similar landscape as a few photographs ago. In the foreground, on the left, you see some very young Proteaceae, some protea flowers. You also see the restives. And if you look closely at this photograph, you start seeing the incredible diversity of this landscape. In this specific region, if you do a biodiversity count, so a biodiversity count would be making a 1 square meter block and count all different plant species in that block. So in this region, it's anywhere between 15 and 25 species per square meter. It's that kind of biodiversity. And that's what we need to maintain through protecting by burning at the right time, etc.
And also part of the income from the farm is sustainable harvesting of fynbos, which needs to be done in a really sensitive and limited extent. So of course, even the utilization of fynbos flowers, there has been in some cases overpicking, for example, and overexploitation. So one really needs to understand what is sustainable flower picking practices and how much can we pick and when. So a lot of our efforts have been going into that, and we've definitely erred on the conservative side. We haven't wanted to rely on fynbos flower harvesting as part of the income, more wanted to attract people to come and visit the reserve and derive income in that way.
These few photographs is just to show you a little bit more of the incredible biodiversity. Left top and bottom right are Proteaceae, the proteas. The one on the bottom right is a red data list. Highly threatened, very vulnerable because of not overpicking, because of agriculture and land transformation through alien vegetation. And later on, in a while, we're going to talk a little bit more about the impact of non-indigenous vegetation on our landscape. Top right is a 𝗘𝗰, that specific one, Fascist Capensis, very beautiful, very unique little flower. It's one of the bulbous plants. That little flower is the photograph you see there. The flower is maybe about 1.5 centimeters big. Bottom left is a typical wetland arum lily, we call it, and inside is an arum lily frog, a unique frog associated with this specific vegetation and that specific plant as well.
And so just talking about the last picture, of course, many people are interested in the conservation of wildlife and animals, but of course, animals need a habitat, they need a place to live. So our efforts have largely been focusing on the vegetation, which is in fact the habitat and a home for some of these unique wildlife species, which are also present on the reserve. So here we see some other pictures of some unique fynbos. In fact, the top left there is quite a threatened leucodendron 𝗘𝗰𝘁, and that's obviously named after the nearby region or town called Elim, the historic town of Elim, and a very threatened species because it's also present on those lowlands and has suffered from not only agriculture and transformation, but also overpicking in some circumstances historically. And then on the right there, also a very local endemic species, 𝗘𝗰𝗁𝗃𝗁𝗃𝗁𝗃 pretty much only found very locally in that area, in the Elim area and slightly beyond. And then on the bottom, we can see another 𝗘𝗁𝗃 species, also quite unique, 𝗘𝗰𝗁𝗃𝗁𝗃, quite a local endemic.
And these are, I see I've got that little dispatches again, and on the left side is another 𝗘𝗰𝗁𝗃, very unique, very, very rare, and on the right hand top is another protea, amazingly, and this one again, 𝗘𝗰𝗁𝗃𝗁𝗃, or as William mentioned earlier, a pincushion, typical pincushion. a few more dizers and incredible diversity. This is only very few of what is on the reserve, but also if you imagine 9,500 species and if you imagine 15 or 20 species per square meter, you can imagine it's a wow, paradise.
And they're all flowering at different times of the year. So there's always surprises, and there's such diversity that there's always an eye opener, no matter how long or how often you seem to walk through the veldt. So the amazing biodiversity is never boring and always stimulating. So as we mentioned earlier, quite a lot of our efforts around conserving this unique fynbos ecology and biodiversity have been focused on landscape restoration. And so the big challenges there, apart from halting the transformation to agriculture, ploughing up fynbos, for example, we need to think about managing the fire cycles, and the alien invasive plants. And of course, maintaining our viable seed banks, which is of course linked to the fire and alien cycles, but also highly linked to the picking practices. So some of the neighboring farms, for example, they've definitely outpicked some of their species. So historically they've overpicked, and now there isn't a possible income to be derived from that landscape, and there's a loss in biodiversity and all sorts of consequences. So the invasive alien plants, as I mentioned, there's been several, of course, introduced to South Africa. And of course, globalization has been spreading invasive species all over the world. But some invasive or exotic species, when introduced, they become invasive. They become real problem plants. So they become problems because they can't seem to be kept under control. They horrendously outcompete the indigenous species. So they take over huge tracts of land and result in a conversion of what would be, in other words, a very biodiverse region into almost a monoculture. So there's quite a number of invasive species which have been introduced into South Africa. And in fact, it's a huge problem. There's estimated to be about 20 million hectares of land in South Africa which are impacted by invasive plants. And of course, that not only threatens biodiversity, but also, land productivity, effective land use. So these invasive plants are a huge problem. And in fact, not only for biodiversity, but also for water. They consume considerably more water than the indigenous vegetation. And the government launched some time ago a Working for Water program, which is more or less a poverty relief program, to try and help assist in this process, to try and help clear up the mess of invasive alien plants spreading across the landscape and destroying our biodiversity. So it's a huge challenge. And the main trees, or the main plants impacting or invading fynbos are the trees, a lot of the trees from Europe and Australia to some extent. So we're talking about the pines, which you can see in this picture, a big pine on the right there, which is coming from Europe. But also we've got eucalypts from Australia largely, and wattles as well. So those are the three main problem plant species. There's of course many others, but these are the large trees which often impact fynbos and take over large parts of land and need to be managed.
This is a typical area and something that we do very often at the reserve. There's big stands. In this case, it was a little forest of about 2 hectares of acacias. You can, if you look at the soil under those acacia trees, where we've cleared the soil, there's basically no other plants present there. It's bare soil where the invasives take over. There is no space for what should have been there, and that diversity we spoke about is gone.
So in contrast to, of course, indigenous forests, which are very limited in fynbos. So of course, there's just small pockets of indigenous forests in the fynbos biome. But in contrast to, normal indigenous forests, which would have quite a diversity of different tree species and also an understory of different plants, what happens when these exotic plants invade fynbos is that you just get a monoculture of invasives. There's just a single stand of acacias or eucalypts or pines. There's no other biodiversity. There's no understory of fynbos which can survive. So it really does have a huge impact. And of course, it does seem odd to work in conservation and maybe to be chopping down and taking out trees, but this is quite a unique aspect to this part of the world. We're talking about conserving our unique fynbos ecology and the biodiversity here. And some of our efforts are in fact going into a limited amount of reforestation with indigenous trees, and we'll talk about that a bit later.
This is a typical area that was pine trees or were pine trees. You can see a few of them left. Wherever the pines were, the soil is basically dead. In the foreground, you see here a little bit of what is essentially indigenous, and further back, hardly any left.
But of course, what can happen in an area like this is if we clear it and surrounding there's enough fynbos, we can get recruitment of fynbos species into that area, and we can get restoration of that area and return to actual fynbos. So that's the approach that we're using, basically clearing invaded areas and generally naturally allowing the revegetation to occur from the surrounding areas.
Yeah, and yet again, people think conservation is planting trees. It's not. In this case, it's definitely more getting rid of trees, unfortunately. We try to derive a little bit of, to get our money back from the efforts of doing alien clearing. It's not cheap to cut aliens down and maintain massive tracts of land. So we try to sell what we can. So it becomes part of the economy of our reserve. Talking a bit about fire, this is a very different subject. We recently, a few months ago, burned an area of 72 hectares. I added this slide to show you the kind of planning that goes into working and regenerating an area. And if you think 72 hectares, that is massive. That's a massive area. But we need to take into account wind direction. We need to take into account surrounding vegetation, the neighbors, aliens, alien trees, etc. So we spoke about fire earlier, and William will talk you through a little bit about the need for fire just now, more.
So as I mentioned, fire is an intricate part of fynbos and fynbos ecology. We need these fire cycles or these fire regimes. They're essential for renewing the population. And in fact, many of the fynbos species, the germination of the seeds, rely on the smoke and the chemicals coming from a fire. So they're heavily reliant to stimulate the next generation on that fire cycle. And of course, if you don't manage the fire cycles appropriately and have a suitable mosaic of land, that fire can come in an untimely and unwanted fashion and maybe take out some of the biodiversity you don't want. So in this example, we carried out a planned burn of the 72 hectares, and that involved a lot of organization. We obviously didn't want the fire to escape that region and going into any other regions. We wanted to maintain a container to that particular area. So we had a lot of people helping us with this initiative, which happened last year, and fire marshals, on site, a lot of people monitoring the actual fire's progress and keeping it under control. And that was a really interesting part of the project. And of course, also we want to keep a track of the biodiversity to make sure that we can monitor what comes back and see the future of Fynbos and its return to a more thriving biodiversity in that area.
Just to also draw a line with what it is a Mediterranean landscape. It needs fire. It's very similar to the south of Europe, what is happening very often in Spain and in Greece, in California, with wildfires that go crazy, partly because of global warming, but partly also because for a long time people tried to keep fire away instead of planning a burn at the right time to regenerate the landscape. So in this way, we're regenerating a landscape safely and not wait for that runaway wildfire that might come this coming summer, potentially. The people who live near a city like Cape Town might surely know the feeling of a whole mountain on fire very close to your house. It's scary. It is very scary. In this photograph, you can also see the very wide cleared area. So before starting a fire like this, the planning for this fire was actually over a 4-year period. So you need to know your landscape, you need to know your veld age. The 4 years prior to the fire, we did the alien clearing you saw in some of the previous photographs. And the last few weeks before the fire, we had to physically make fire breaks, actually not by hand, but with a tractor and brush cutter. And basically a 10-meter wide clear strip to protect the nearby vegetation or the adjoining vegetation. Here's some of the images of the recent fire. The photograph on the bottom right, or on the bottom left, you can see a huge fire break on the right-hand side, and then you see a massive alien or pine trees stand on the right of that fire break. So that is a neighboring property with a massive alien vegetation problem. If that fire would jump into that neighbor's property, it would, if the wind would change direction the other way, it would be devastating, and several properties adjoining would burn. So it's very important to be very careful when executing a fire like this. But it is all just to emphasize, fire seems so destructive, but it is actually to regenerate a vegetation type, to basically sowing the seeds, what we are doing here now. And of course, after fire, this was very shortly after the fire, one of those bulbous plants, and you see a few little green shoots. This is about 2 weeks after the fire, and biodiversity will come back. And at the moment, that area is green. You don't see soil anymore within a few months.
So after the fire cycle, we'll obviously see some new species we haven't seen before as a result of the rejuvenation of the veld. And that's the important part of the process. We're returning back to essentially the young part of the veld and building up that succession again until that veld reaches about 12 or 20 years. And then, as I mentioned, it's really aging and senescing. A lot of it's dying off. So if you go into old Fynbos, really old 15, 20 years, you'll see relatively little biodiversity, a lot of woody dead material in the veld. and it's really ready for a burn. It's wanting to burn to rejuvenate itself. So some of our products, in fact, from maintaining, conserving this veldt, as I mentioned before, some of it is the picking of flowers, the sustainable picking of flowers. And we've been doing that to a limited extent, mostly on a small scale for restaurants, guest houses. We did have a niche market for a small time doing exports overseas to the UK, but generally the markets are quite limited. And that's for a few reasons. Fynbos is natural vegetation, so it will have insect damage and nibbles on the leaves and some spoilage. And of course, many of the modern consumers don't like that. They want this perfect flower. And of course, Fynbos is very small flowers and very delicate and intricate and diverse. It's also flowers with relatively short stems. And unfortunately, the trends, at least recently, have been for very big, showy flowers with long stems. And that is, in fact, not appropriate for Fynbos. And in fact, it can be damaging for Fynbos to try and pick plants at that suitable length, because you can damage the plant if you try to pick too low down in the bush to get that long stem length. So Fynbos is really these small bouquets, and you just see when you pick a bouquet with appropriate stem length, you'll start to find all this biodiversity, this amazing biodiversity you see in these two bunches here. And of course, one of the other products coming from the conservation of the veldt is honey. So we've been slowly building up beehives in the veldt to harbor natural honeybees, Apis honeybees, and been harvesting the Fynbos honey, you can see there, and selling that to a limited extent on organic markets or to other suitable customers from our farm stores.
Also about the honey and honeybees. So there's a limit to how many beehives you can put in Fynbos veldt. We've got currently 37 hives on 700 hectares. We will push it up to maybe about 100 hives. Unfortunately, honeybees, we like the honey, but honeybees are very often thieves in the Fynbos veldt. A lot of Fynbos is pollinated. A lot of Fynbos is pollinated by other insects, by moths and flies and stuff like that. So it's very important to carefully think of where the beehives will be placed to keep the biodiversity there, not for the bees to take from more than they should.
Ultimately, I guess it's all about trying to find that sensitive balance in nature.
And here's a few more of those little Fynbos bunches.
I think you can see the amazing biodiversity and probably things you really haven't seen in the shops before, because people are mostly focused on those big showy flowers and miss all this unique Fynbos, this fine bush, this biodiversity. And we're just going to take you through a bit more to make your eyes open and your mouths drop.
Thank you.
You can see in this bunch helichrysums and ericas and restios and leucodendrons, quite a diversity of species. So the last aspect we want to... The last aspect I think we want to talk to you about is some of the work we'll be doing around environmental education and conservation. And Curator has formed a non-profit organization called Overberg Eco Rangers, and they're carrying out their conservation work and environmental education at Sandberg.
The area you see in this photograph is invaded with alien vegetation. It was an old field, so much better to share an area like that with more people. So myself and 2 local high school teachers started this non-profit organization, bringing kids from local schools in the 𝗣𝗶𝘃𝗃 region at the southern tip of Africa, of this region, to the reserve to experience the diversity of the vegetation that they live in. A lot of kids from poorer backgrounds or from towns never have the chance to experience nature. A lot of kids think looking in the distance, if it's green, it's nature. So bringing kids to a site like this, we asked children to help us do some alien clearing and do some and eventually this will be a outdoor classroom.
So part of the idea of this region, as Karat mentioned, it's in the lowlands. So probably about 40 or 50, 60 years ago, that lowland fynbos or an Oosterveld was plowed up and used for agriculture. Since then, we're trying to get it to return to what was there, natural vegetation. Although unfortunately, a lot of those species which were found in the lowlands, the Oosterveld, they've gone, they're extinct. So more than 95% of the lowland fynbos has disappeared forever. We no longer can bring those species back. But this particular area that you see here, it's a very wet area. And perhaps at one time there was an indigenous forest there. In fynbos, you find very few indigenous trees. They're mostly in the kloofs or in the wet pockets. In other words, they're protected from those fire cycles. And there you will find, a diversity of indigenous trees. So the aim of this area, which of course has long been transformed and is now impacted by invasive alien trees, invasive alien plants, the initiative is to take out those invasives and to restore it into an indigenous forest. And that's where the work in this area is going.
So a different perspective on the area, that's myself walking there in front. This is right at the beginning, clearing this area of invasive aliens. They maybe up to 5 meters, 5-6 meters tall. And this area we slowly developing, or over the last year and a half, we've developing as an outdoor classroom for the kids, and also as a test site for reforestation and regeneration of this specific area. This is one of the things we're doing. I'll go to the next slide. Part of the outdoor classroom is also to showcase what we plant. So we've been part of it. We're busy planting and medicinal plants. One section will be a medicinal plant walk. So the whole area, every tree species, every plant species there will be interpreted for kids to understand, to learn a little bit about. In this specific case, 𝗘𝗰𝗄𝗄 is our local Afrikaans and Xhosa names for this specific medicinal species. This specific species has got also strong spiritual connotations for Southern Africans. So part of our education is not only connected to, or not only showing a child how to plant a tree, or is also to explore a bit our roots in Southern Africa, our combined roots, whether it be, in this case, our medicinal roots, our spiritual roots connected to the earth. Right. And in this photograph, we're busy building a round hut And I specifically call it a round hut because it's a universal structure. You find these round huts all over the world. It's a very simple structure to put up, and it showcases to kids what might have been used as a house or a gathering space. In the foreground, you see the whole area in the foreground has been cleared. There's few plants already planted in the foreground. In the background, you still see a big stand of alien vegetation. And of course, friends from all walks of life come and help. And of course, the kids, for the kids. The round hut is developing, some local friends helping. And here's some planting with kids, and in the bottom right photograph you can already see the site slowly developing further.
So of course, having cleared the area, as I mentioned, there's a lot of natural regeneration coming back. There's existing fynbos seeds under the soil, and a lot of them are germinating once we've cleared the invasive alien plants. And of course, then there's also recruitment seeds coming in from the surrounding area into that region. But as I mentioned, part of the efforts is in fact to try and reforest the area with indigenous trees. So as you can see in this picture, we're busy planting a whole range of different indigenous tree species, which of course are non-invasive and should be there. And one day we hope to, in fact, establish what will be a really awesome indigenous forest. So at the moment, I think we've got over about 500 trees planted in this area.
So far this year.
And of course, we hope to keep going, depending on our ability and of course, all the willing volunteers and happy participants. Some more pictures of tree planting quite recently. With kids and other people who are interested. We have these days several times a year where we open up the farm and invite people to come and plant. We have a few keen people who help supply and donate indigenous trees, and we get together on one day and have a big planting day, tree planting day. So I guess in summary, we welcome visitors and offer guided and unguided botanical exploration and drives in this area, and that's our main focus. We don't want to overutilize or overexploit the vegetation type. We more want to bring people to this unique area so that they can experience nature and appreciate it. So we also offer accommodation and developing supporting services. We've got a country cottage and we supply vegetarian and vegan meals as well. So below you can see contact details. If you'd like to get involved or come visit, please drop us a line and we'll welcome you with open arms. Thank you. So we'd like to leave the rest of the session for some questions, and we'd be happy to answer any questions and have further discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was truly inspiring and also very, very educational. I've learned so much more about fynbos, and also I loved really understanding the difference between restoring the land and reforestation, which I know William really spoke about. Thank you very much. And then also you told me in our other conversation we had about your forest of remembrance.
Oh, of course, this is part of the tree planting. So many of these 500 trees that were planted this year. But so when we have an open day inviting people to come and plant a tree, we ask them to plant it in remembrance of a loved one. We then afterwards go, all the trees are marked with a number, and we take a GPS and we send the GPS to the person, and and the GPS plus the name of the tree. So afterwards, that person will know where his or her tree is, which they planted for one of their loved ones. So it brings in a little bit of that connection of even the people who's gone from this earth with our natural environment. We basically plant for the people who has been, so in this case for remembrance, but that tree will definitely be for the future. Long beyond our lifetime, that tree hopefully will support this property and support our beautiful planet, definitely.
And also I think it's part of the process of encouraging people to come back and see their tree as part of remembering their loved one, and to make that connection with nature in their lives, for example, to make it a spiritual and a welcoming place, that natural environment.
Thank you. I love the concept and actually doing that. A lot of us have lost a lot of loved ones, and I couldn't think of a better way to actually honor them than to know that you're planting a tree in a place which you know is going to be preserved, you know, and loved, yeah, and a place that you can come back to visit. So we have a couple of questions for you. I'm just gonna go through this. Albie just says, thank you so much for doing that. The Forest of Remembrance is very special. I've got a couple of comments. So we've got a question from Liesel Berger. She said, thinking of your own journey and that of other farmers who want to protect biodiversity, what are the key areas of support required to walk this road if it was sponsored?
It's quite a challenge. So obviously restoration and caring for nature takes resources and effort and money. And you know, some of the challenge is to try and finance that. So we've been getting support in various ways from volunteers, from Cape Nature, for example, who offer a stewardship program and offer support to establish a nature reserve. We've also got support from the government Working for Water program, which has given some labor basically to cover the costs of invasive alien plant clearing. And I think just the support from anybody who comes and is inspired by nature and is willing to participate in any kind of restoration activity. So whether it's hacking out invasive alien trees, planting indigenous plants, planting, you know, fynbos or indigenous trees, I think that is the support that we kind of also need.
Yeah, it's definitely not, but especially not on this scale, on the scale of Sandberg, to do by yourself. It's very difficult to do by yourself. So it's certainly a community effort to, so a farmer, if any farmer, other farmer wants to do this, get your community involved, because there are people, definitely people who want to contribute. They might just not be sure where to stick their hands in the soil to do something. So put the word out there and you will get help. You also need to be tenacious. You need to keep on doing what you're doing and do it over time. It's not something that comes quickly.
And some of the support comes in surprising ways. So a few years ago, some people spotted quite a unique bird species, which they haven't seen before. So it is in fact a new species, a button quail. And of course, all the birders or twitchers have started to go crazy. So we've had lots of visitors coming to the reserve, and they pay a conservation fee to come and view the button quail and to tick it off their list. And that's a kind of amazing support. And of course, without the vegetation there, those birds wouldn't be there. So as I mentioned before, we need to create this habitat, this amazing habitat for conserving all sorts of biodiversity.
Yeah, and we as humans are very much part of this landscape. Our involvement in this landscape is necessary. If we all disappear, monoculture will probably prevail on a place like this. So you just need to go on doing it. Yes.
I guess it takes an ecosystem, of all forms, and collaboration, and this is, I think, where the eco-civilization model also comes in, is that for our future and the future for our next generations, it really is going to take community collaboration built on an ecosystemic, format. Let's learn kind of like from nature and how with the habitat, all of these, all of the animals have habitat to thrive kind of together, but it needs that biodiversity to really thrive on all levels.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also another takeaway from listening to you as well, in terms of like the support in something like this, I think is there's delicate balance between ecology and economy. And it's also kind of really redeveloping those models, moving away from where we are now into an eco-civilization to look at what new models can we kind of create to sustain and support our biodiverse, beautiful pieces of nature. And I think those answers we don't have yet, but I think that they will emerge.
Exactly.
Violetta asks, how much of your work depends on public regulation? Is there any laws on alien species?
Yeah, definitely. We've got very strong laws against aliens or these invasive species. Every landowner have to take out the aliens or these invasives, but very few can actually afford it. The cost of clearing invasives from land is enormous. So most people don't do it, and the law is not enforced, unfortunately not.
Yeah, so there's the legislation called NEMBA, the National Environment Management Biodiversity Act. And within NEMBA, there's a whole range of listed species within 3 categories. So of course, invasive species can be really bad or not so bad or quite bad, if you like. And so they're categorized in that 1, 2, or 3. But all those invasive species under that legislation need to be appropriately managed with the idea of eradicating them from your landscape. But as 𝗘𝗏 mentioned, both the huge burden to the landowner and also the fact that we're not very compliant in terms of legislation, nor is the legislation enforced properly or effectively, means that, yeah, the invasives are basically spreading, and many landowners don't control them and put in appropriate eradication efforts for those reasons. It's a huge challenge.
Do you have an action step for us as like the public to take to assist with invasive species?
I mean, I think the first step is, if you can, join some hack group and get involved in invasive alien clearing.
Yeah.
Get out in nature and appreciate biodiversity and the endemic flora. So that's what you want, and that's what you want to see, and that's supporting it. Visit nature reserves and people in places who support the conservation of fynbos. That's essentially providing your monetary and non-monetary support to those people. Volunteer your time in some particular way to be involved in whatever it may be, in education or restoration or helping, in terms of fire management, in taking part in a controlled burn or something. All those activities are really important. I think just get out into nature and try to be involved, and that's the main point, yes.
And so if I'm walking on Table Mountain and I see a little pine shoot, would it be okay for me to pull that out?
Please do.
Yeah. It should be your civic duty, in
Yeah.
fact. So yes, I think so. And in fact, that's also very important, that people should be able to recognize those species and be willing to just deal with them in their own capacity. Like you say, on a walk or something, or taking a little bow saw with them where they're somewhere, even if it's a public land, just taking that out because it's doing your social good.
Okay, that's a wonderful action step we can take. There's another suggestion. Michelle Nell says, it would be great if the nutritional, medicinal, and spiritual uses of the plants could also be captured on the iNaturalist site. Is that possible?
Yeah, I guess it is. I think the main point of the iNaturalist is the species identification. And of course, many of those species might have medicinal or herbal uses. So you can comment, in that regard. And 𝗣𝗶𝗃, this is a wonderful plant. It's used for, bronchitis and asthma, and also for clearing away bad spirits, etc. So yeah, I think the key point is recognizing, that plant, and therefore knowing that it has those type of values, being able to do the species identification, which is the point of iNaturalist. It's to get the citizens out there to identify plants so we know where the species are in the landscape and to be able to identify them effectively.
And if you know where they are, then you will make a point of protecting it. If you realize also, iNaturalists also make you very quickly realize which are the threatened species. And
Right.
so as you start to get to know the app, you start to interact with the app, you start to get to know the species you're interested in, or the ones you've posted on iNat. You start looking out for them in other areas as well. So it's basically citizen science, it's knowledge building for everybody.
Yes.
Very
And
important.
that is so incredibly important. I think it's just knowledge sharing. And I think it is our duty to learn, from nature, to learn the plant species in your area, to really get to know about it, especially if you want to be an eco warrior in our world, which is really needed, an eco activist. And also, sorry, William, go.
No, I was just going to add, globally, we're basically facing the fifth great extinction. Yeah. And, that's huge biodiversity loss. And the tragedy is that we don't even know what we're losing. So that species identification, actually knowing what's there so we can actually manage and protect it, is really key.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also like a deeper connection, I remember also sharing with you the story when I was in Cape Town with the huge fires. Looking at this bare landscape, and then within 2 weeks seeing how incredible nature is in her regeneration, and seeing these fire lilies, which you showed us, that beautiful red flower, which is the first one to pop up, which was such a sign of hope for me. And that really inspired me to learn more about fynbos. And I learned that fire is so healthy and it's supposed to happen. And we kind of prevent it and stop it in our urban areas. And so this is why it's such, a danger, and it gets out of control. So it really inspired me to learn so much more and to connect with all the plant species around me, which I was appreciating, but it brought me into a deeper connection or relation with it. So when I was walking through the fynbos, I had a different connection with the plant species. So it's that knowledge which is so incredibly important for us. You also told me about, you've got a program coming up with natural building. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about that, and if we could possibly join you.
Yes, you can certainly contact us for the details. And we've got a twice yearly natural building program. We're busy restoring a very old little cottage at the reserve. It's been the fourth building project. No, the fifth one is coming up in November, this coming November. If you contact me directly, I'll share the information about this building course with you.
So it's using traditional materials, clay bricks, which were used on this old house almost 100 years ago, perhaps. And we're restoring this old house using exactly the same techniques. And we've got a very interesting natural building architect who runs the course that we host on the reserve. So yeah, we'd love participants to get involved.
That's wonderful. It's another way, I think, in which we can really learn to also be self-sufficient, is to really learn how to use natural products around us to build our home and our shelter. And it's quite empowering to actually be able to do that, to know that I can, you know, work with nature instead of against it to build my own shelter.
Sure.
So we can send out those links, or maybe I'll ask one of my team members to maybe just post a link or your details to it, but your details are Sandberg Fanboss Reserve. Just see if there's any other questions, if anybody else would like to post any other questions. Just scrolling through here. No, we had another question here. Let's see. There we go. Michelle has just posted your links. So if anybody would like the details, it's all there. While I look for another question, is there anything, any message that you would like to share with us? Anything else you would like to share?
Well, anything else I'd like to share is come and visit and see for yourself. Come and experience biodiversity. And as William mentioned earlier, go out in nature and experience nature. Nature isn't sitting in front of the TV and watching a nature program. Nature is actually getting out there and doing something for nature in nature.
Absolutely. So it's experiencing it and therefore valuing it and recognizing all the valuable ecosystem services that a landscape can give you, whether it's pollination services or natural building products or attenuations of floods and mitigating fire risks and providing clean water. So those are really important. And it's only through interacting with nature that you really just start to become aware and start to feel and realize those aspects, start to interconnect and make those linkages between what nature can provide. And therefore you start to value it even more and more.
Thank you. Violeta asks, can we hope for such reserves all over the world in spite of our growing population? This is the hard question, right? How do we?
I think it's essential.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is the biggest challenge, perhaps, is the consumption. You know, the consumption per capita or the footprint of people. That's the damaging aspect to the world. So lowering everyone's environmental footprint is pretty key to the future as populations grow, if they continue to grow at the current rate.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, becoming more conservative and having a lower footprint, the way you actually live, and valuing those ecosystem services and nature more. I think that's really what we can do to support sustainable development and natural resource management going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So I think we've come to completion. I don't see any other questions. I want to really, really thank you for your time today and for sharing your beautiful Sandberg Fanboss Reserve with us. And I also just want to really thank you for answering the call to step onto this beautiful land as custodians and to not continue with the monoculture of maybe the history of it, but to really restoring the land to maybe her authentic face I know it's a great challenge and it takes a lot of courage to do things in a different way. And so I really just want to thank you from my heart to yours for creating a space like this and for inviting us into it and for sharing all of your knowledge with us today. I'm sure that everybody would love to come and visit and to experience it for themselves. So thank you very, very much for everything that we've learned from you today.
Absolute pleasure.
Great, thank you very much.
𝗣𝗍𝘁 also said thank you very much. So I also would like to thank everybody that joined us here today for our South African wing of Ecocivilisation. We will see you again at our next one. As I said, this is part 1 of our plant kingdom theme. There seems to be so much more to say and to learn about the topic that we'll have a part 2 to all of this. But I'd really love to thank everybody for joining us today. And we'll see you on the next one. And I'm sure you will see some beautiful people coming to visit and support Sandberg quite soon.
Great,
So wishing you
thank
all
you.
a beautiful equinox. Today is the equinox, so wishing everybody a beautiful equinox. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Goodbye.
much. Really inspiring. So thanks.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.